The science of personality is comprised of different components and patterns of thinking, feeling, and behavior. Each personality is unique to the person and is developed by a multitude of scenarios that psychologists have tried to pinpoint since the late 1800s. Sigmund Freud and his followers spearheaded the study of personality by saying childhood experiences shaped personalities. Later, B.F. Skinner and other behavioral psychologists attempted to apply the principles of learning to personality development. Carl Rogers and other humanistic psychologists actively dispelled Freudian theories of personality and his approaches. In 1874, Ernst von Bruch coined the term psychodynamic as an extension from the law of thermodynamics, which states that energy in a closed system can change from one form to another, but cannot be destroyed or created. As a student of von Bruch's, Freud decided to make psychodynamics the foundation of his theories on personality. He believed psychic energy moved along the compartments of personality, the id, ego, and the superego. Through his treatments of psychoanalysis, Freud was successfully able to treat his patients with hysteria. The id is the compartment of personality that is present at birth. It contains the primitive desires that are a source of energy for our personalities like hunger, thirst, and sex. According to Freud, the id operates according to the pleasure principle that seeks immediate gratification. Think of it as the devil on your shoulder. It is essentially who we are and helps coordinate the id with reality. The superego forms when a child starts to understand society's morals of what's right and what's wrong. It can also be thought of as your conscience. Anxiety can cause the ego to engage in protective behavior called defense mechanisms. Freud believed that these mechanisms help us carry painful or self-destructive psychic energy into more manageable behaviors. However, these defense mechanisms can further damage the ego. Freud assumed that problems of personality began in the developmental past of his patients, not their present circumstance. He surmised this through the process of psychoanalysis. According to Freud, the product of conflict in psychosexual stages between the id, ego, and superego make up a personality. Contemporary theorists, known as neo-Freudians, substitute the social competence of sexuality and pleasure. They brought the psychodynamic approach closer to contemporary views of humans as social animals. Neo-Freudians. Alfred Adler brought the concept of an inferiority complex to psychodynamics. Adler believed that someone who has an inferiority complex can lead to overcompensation viewed as superiority. Teens who might feel inferior to their peers will show off their new iPhones as a way of coping. Carl Jung took the unconscious mind and split it into two parts. Personal and conscious remain the same to Freudian theory. Jung added a deeper level he called the collective unconscious, which is composed of common psychological predispositions. His ideas are present among the evolutionary approach to psychology, which sees the mind adapting over the course of evolution. He also provided more thought into differences of individual personalities. Two characteristics that are present in current discussions stem from these thoughts. Extroversion, known as the outgoing side of our personality, and introversion, known as the less outgoing side. These characteristics formed a base for personality tests like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator test. Karen Horney, one of the first female psychiatrists, concentrated on the idea of culture that contributed to women's feelings of inferiority. Behaviorists and humanists. Most behavioral psychologists believe that learning heavily influenced personality development. They theorize that since someone is constantly learning in their lifetime, there is an expectation of personalities adjusting and varying over time. If your parents forced you to practice good eating habits at a young age, there is a strong likelihood that you will continue to have good eating habits. Humanistic psychologists were convinced that humans are unique individuals and developed theories based on studying successful people to compare similarities. Abraham Maslow studied human motivation, and after reviewing multiple biographies of well-renowned people, he observed that there were several common characteristics. Carl Rogers. He introduced the theory that humans seek self-actualization, and those who followed paths led by their feelings would have healthy, productive lives. This would be dependent on feedback from family or friends to you achieving goals. If the response is positive, then you will reach self-actualization. The opposite response can lead to negative outcomes like depression or anxiety. Trait theories. How do they explain personality? Traits are described as stable characteristics of personality. Psychologists use traits to explain different clusters of personality based on similarities. Those who exhibited anxious traits would be expected to exhibit quiet and reserved qualities. Early efforts to identify personality traits began with choosing over 4,500 words out of the dictionary that could describe certain traits. These words are used today to describe traits such as intelligent, diligent, or outgoing. The Big Five theory. Theorists found a common theme used to describe and predict personality traits. These findings establish the Big Five theory, which identifies 5 main characteristics that make up the variances in personalities. The different traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, also known as OCEAN. After settling on these 5 personality traits, psychologists were able to explore the theory scientifically through the NEOPIR inventory test. Each of the traits consists of a constant from one extreme to another. The Big Five theory traits. Openness involves fantasy, aesthetics, feelings, actions, ideas, and values. Those who score high with openness are expected to be curious, eccentric, or artistic. Think always being down for anything. Conscientiousness is characterized by competence, order, dutifulness, goal-oriented, self-discipline, and deliberation. People who match with this trait are hardworking, reliable, and complete tasks on time. This is your friend who you can always count on to do a great job. Extroversion. Extroversion portrays someone by warmth, gregariousness, assertiveness, activity, excitement-seeking, and positive emotion. Think of this trait describing your most popular friend. Introversion describes someone as the opposite of an extrovert, often reserved, passive, and cautious. Agreeableness defines someone who is trustworthy, straightforward, altruistic, compliant, and modest. Are usually good leaders who can make tough decisions. This is your friend who's always right and keeps it real. Neuroticism. Neuroticism mixes anxiety, anger, depression, self-consciousness, impulsivity, and vulnerability. Someone who scores high with this trait might have a threatening environment and depicts survival. Think of that friend who makes wild decisions no matter what the outcome. Situations and personalities. There has been research conducted to show that situations can also influence personality traits. Behavioral psychologists began to recognize the importance of personality in social environments. The theory of social cognitive learning illustrates that features of cognition and learning, especially from a social setting, as important sources of differences in personality. One type of social cognitive learning is known as locus of control. The 2 types of locus of control are external, where you might expect most things that happen to you are based on luck or chance. The other is internal, which you'd expect things to happen based on your own efforts. Another type of social cognitive learning refers to reciprocal determinism, which is a balance of external environmental factors and internal traits. Albert Bandura developed this theory in agreement with Skinner based on how environments influence behavior. He also believed that people also influence their environment through internal behaviors. If-then relationships, with personality being the last type of social cognitive learning. Walter Mischel believed that certain trait theories couldn't explain varying behaviors, thus the if-then theory was developed. Biological basis of personality. There is a connection between traits and biological variables. Theorists believe connection is between personality and temperament, genetic predispositions, and brain structures. Temperament is a child's pattern of mood, activity, or emotional responsiveness that is linked to their personality. Research on temperaments in children have shown that children who are willing to take risks are treated differently than those who are more afraid of the unknown. In adults, 2 types of characteristics make up temperament: reactivity, which are people's responses, and self-regulation, which is the ability to control the response. Genetics is suggested to play a part in personality development. A study of twins, both identical and fraternal, found that the identical twins raised together or apart had similar traits to their personality. Due to the influence of genetics on personality, it's safe to assume that brain structure can cause individual differences on personality. Assessing personality. Personality inventories have advantages over interviewing patients or recording information through observation. A big advantage is the ability to assess a large group of people inexpensively. A frequently used test in Minnesota is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory Test, which compares responses from typical subjects who have been hospitalized for psychological disorders against true or false items. It can also be used in conjunction with college or career advising, employee screenings, or different types of counseling. A projective test is a test that is made up from a Freudian defense mechanism called projection. These tests can reach the unconscious mind by using ambiguous stimulus, allowing the subjects to project their personalities. A famous version of this test is the inkblot test, which asks the subject to describe what they see in the inkblot. The answers are scored according to a manual. What does it mean to have a self? Patterns of thoughts, feelings, and actions we see in ourselves is referred to as self. Your sense of self correlates with a few different factors. One of these factors is having a sense of unity or of being a single person. Having a sense of unity helps us keep track of events. It also allows you to be able to make a sort of layout of your personal experiences like a timeline. Without this aspect of self, we would not be able to differentiate events from the past, present, or future, and it would all be balled up into one big category. Another aspect is having a sense of embodiment, which means that the self is embedded in the body. Have you ever had an out-of-body experience? These experiences are the opposite of having a sense of embodiment because you feel like your mind and self are separate from your body. Types of self. Self-concept refers to the demographic factors such as age or personality features. We use self-schemas to think about many of these attributes of the self. Schemas are used to provide structures for organizing information. Self-awareness. When we do stuff like talking about ourselves, look in a mirror, or see ourselves in a video, it causes us to be more self-aware of ourselves. For most people, this increased self-awareness is not fun and is very uncomfortable. Self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is the way the self is perceived by others. Most of the time, we overestimate how much others pay attention to our behaviors. This phenomenon is called the spotlight effect. Self-esteem is based on the global overall self-worth or specific particular characteristics such as appearance. Self-esteem begins at a very young age and can be predicted in children at 6 years old. Another thing that influences self-esteem is social comparisons. Gender, race, and culture also influence one's self-esteem. Advantages of self-esteem can benefit not only the individual with it, but also the groups this person with high self-esteem is involved with. These people tend to be happier and more persistent, and when faced with bad news, people with high self-esteem tend to take it better than those with low self-esteem. Self-regulation consists of conscious efforts to our thoughts, motives, feelings, and behaviors. More common words for it are self-control or willpower. When people do not have self-control, it often leads to different problems such as drug abuse, domestic violence, and binge eating. The harder we think about not doing something, the more likely we are to do it. The social self. Your interpersonal self is the group of people who you are close to whose opinions matter. This would include your significant others, family members, friends, coworkers, and social groups you interact with. Cultural influences. An aspect of cultural differences in the distinction between individualism and collectivism. Individualism emphasizes independence and self-reliance, where collectivism focuses on interdependence, cooperation, and lack of conflict.